Hello and welcome to Luminar Coffee Break. I'm Angela Andrieux and today I'm going to show you how to create a grungy Urbex look. Now I'm noticing in the comments already Wolfgang has asked, what is an Urbex look? That's a great question. Urbex is short for urban exploration and it's similar to street photography, but it's different in that most times Urbex and urban exploration is done by going into abandoned places, abandoned buildings, and the goal is to get all of those textures, the peeling paint, the debris, and all of the dusty surfaces, and capture those and really bring out all of that gritty detail. So that's what an Urbex look is, and that's what I'm going to show you today. Let me go ahead and share my screen. There we go. And today I'm going to be working from my home base, which is Lightroom. I have been using Lightroom since version 1, so this is where I keep my library and all of my images, and I typically work with Luminar AI and Aurora HDR as a plugin. So this is the image that we're going to create today. Let me show you what I started with here. Let me go to my grid view, and you'll see that I have a bunch of different brackets of the same shot. So starting from over here on the left through here, these are all of my brackets, and I manually bracketed these with my camera, meaning I had my camera set up on a tripod. I kept my aperture and my ISO constant, so my depth of field was the same and my ISO was the same. And I altered my shutter speed to get different varying levels of light to make sure I had detail in my entire dynamic range from the shadows to the highlights. So if we take a look here at this darkest image, you can see that I've got full detail here in the window, and there's detail in this bright light that's shining in through a window on the side. Let's go back to the grid view. You'll see here in this brightest one that we have detail underneath all of these stairs up here. Every little speck of detail, there's no blocked up shadows. Now, in looking at these images, I decided when I processed my HDR that these two brightest exposures weren't necessary. If we go back here and we look at this one here, I have enough detail in all of the shadow areas that I really think are important. There wasn't a whole lot that was here underneath the stairs, and these darkest areas here on the back of these stairs didn't really have a whole lot of interesting data. It was more about the shapes of the stairs and then, catch a little bit of the detail here under the stairs. When you're processing an HDR, I highly recommend taking a look at the individual frames. You might not need all of them. If some of them are too dark or too light, and that is very subjective, it's better to not use them. You end up with a better end result. So by bringing in these two brightest frames, I was actually ending up with an overbright image that didn't quite look natural and happened to be a little bit blown out. The HDR tries to balance out all of those different exposures, and when you're throwing in exposures that are overbright, it takes that whole balance and sways it up towards the bright end, and you end up with a result that's not as great. So I got a better result by processing this image here. You go ahead and select that. This one here through this one. What I did was take these into Aurora HDR, right click, export, up to Aurora HDR, and I edited a copy with Lightroom adjustments. You can just as easily open your source files. It depends on if you've made any changes in Lightroom, which I did with these images. I fixed the white balance and I did the upright tool and my lens correction, so that was already done. So I went ahead and used the edit with Lightroom adjustments. Once I loaded this into Aurora HDR, the only adjustment I made there was to pull back on the highlights a little bit, and then this is what I got. And this was the balanced image between those first 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 images that I got. Now it's pretty good. We don't have any blown out shadows. We don't have any blown out highlights, and it's fairly balanced, but it's a little bit flat. What I wanted to do from here was really give it that grungy Urbex look that's really indicative of those Urbex photo shoots. If you scroll through Instagram and you search for the hashtag Urbex, you're going to find a lot of really cool stuff of abandoned places, and just, they're absolutely fascinating. This photo was taken at Swannanoa Palace in Afton, Virginia. It's up in the Shenandoah Mountains, and it's a really, really cool old abandoned palace. Now, it is one that's in the process of being maintained by a foundation, and for a small fee, you're able to go in and explore. It's not truly abandoned in the sense of I did any breaking and entering to get in there. I was allowed to go in there and with my camera. So that's a really great place if you want to go and try to get some of these abandoned place photos without the trouble of having to break the law. I highly recommend not breaking the law. So let me take a look here at the comments and see if there's any questions. I want to say hello to Pat, Wolfgang, of course. David, so glad you're all able to be here. Make sure you guys put those questions into the chat and I will do my best to answer them as we go along. All right, so let's go ahead and stylize this image. Now we have our HDR. I'm going to right click on this image, go to export, and I'm going to open it up as a plugin, or open Luminar AI as a plugin. So I'm going to go to edit a copy with Lightroom adjustments under Luminar AI and get going. Let's see, Jerry says, like a coffee break session on how to effectively file, catalog, and store photos. You are in luck. We actually have a series coming up that we'll be starting with you guys next week here on YouTube. If you're part of Insiders, you're getting a taste of that already this week because we do the topics a week early for Insiders. But here on YouTube, we're going to have those topics next week, so stay tuned for those. I think they'll be very helpful for you. All right, so we have our image loaded up here in Luminar AI. What I'm going to do is switch directly over to the Edit tab, and I might do a little bit of Accent AI just to balance out the tones, the colors, the contrast. That's always a good place to start, and you'll see that gave us a small change there. There's the before and the after, a little bit more depth. But now I really want to make that grungy look. So I'm going to start with structure, and this, if you're doing Urbex and you want that really gritty, grungy look, you want that peeling paint and all of those details, structure is your friend. So let's go ahead and pull this up. You'll see I'm pulling this quite a bit to the right. You can pull it all the way up, and that just looks super cool. So let's take a look at the before and the after. Now, I think 100 might be a little bit too much. As I'm editing, 100 is almost always too much for just about everything. There's exceptions for sure. But I'm still going to keep this at a pretty high level, maybe right around there. So just pull it off a little bit. The next thing I want to do is go down to the dramatic tool. And dramatic is really cool in that it adds contrast, it pulls back on the saturation, and further enhances those details. So let's go ahead and move that one up. And you'll see what happens as I pull it to the right. It is getting more desaturated and more contrasty. Now I'm going to use a smaller amount of this down here. I don't want to bring it up too high. I think that looks great. So there's our before and our after. Now, in looking at this image, there's a couple of things I want to do to really draw my viewer in. The first thing is to darken and desaturate a little bit of this arch. This arch leads us into the room, but it's not our primary subject, and right now it's a little bit bright, and I want to tone that back a little bit. All right, I'm going to go up to do that, I'm going to go to Color Tool, and I'm going to go down to HSL, and there's a lot of orange tones throughout the image, so I'm going to make use of our local masking here, but for first things, let's go ahead and pull that orange hue. Not the hue, I want to do the saturation. There we go. Grab that orange slider, and I'm going to pull that back about there, and maybe even grab the red a little bit because there's a lot of red on this edge right here. So that's looking pretty good, but I don't like how it's desaturated the middle of the image, so to fix that, I'm going to go up to the local mask. And you'll notice when I first popped into the color tool, the button here to add mask was not available. The masking on each individual tool only becomes available once you make a change. Once you make a change, that button will pop up and you can go ahead and add your masking. So for this, I'm going to create a medium brush. I'm using the bracket keys on my keyboard to go ahead and make that brush a little bit bigger. I'll bring that opacity down just a little bit so we get a light touch here. And I'm just going to paint that in right along those edges, and then maybe again down the side here just to tone down those edges, but I want to keep all of the saturation inside the room. That's looking a lot better. All right, the next thing I want to do is add a vignette, and what that's going to do is that's going to further draw us in the room, and it's going to darken down these edges. So we'll go down to the vignette tool and click into those advanced settings. We'll pull our amount slider all the way down to -100. I'm going to make the size a little bit smaller, and then I'll click on Choose Subject. And we'll see that the edge of our vignette is just starting to highlight this top edge of the arch. I'm going to actually pull that down a little bit, maybe right about there, just to darken up that edge. Again, we're trying to pull into the middle of the room. Let's see here. Hello, JGmail28. Let's see if there's any other questions. Good, good, good. All right. So now that we have our vignette placed, I might add just a tiny bit of inner light, not too much. And then we'll grab that amount slider and pull it back to the point that it actually looks natural. So when you're looking from a darkened doorway out through to a window, it's expected that you're going to be in a darker area and everything in front of you out in that room is going to be brighter. When we do HDR, the goal is to open up all of those shadows and make them almost as bright as our brightest highlights. So we compress everything, which is great because we get a lot of detail, but it lacks depth and definition. So when we process in HDR, we want to go back in and add some of that depth and contrast selectively. And that's what I'm doing here with this vignette. So we're going to just darken those edges and make it feel like we're peering from a darkened doorway into a bright room. I still have all this gorgeous detail. I haven't lost anything like I would have if I had used just a single exposure, but I'm able to retain it and still create that feeling of depth. All right, so that's looking really, really good. I think the last thing I might want to do here is add a little bit of details. Again, this is going to emphasize that grungy look, all of this wonderful peeling paint and everything else. We'll do a tiny bit of small details, a little bit of medium details, and a tiny bit of large details, and a bit of edge sharpening for good measure. All right, so let's go ahead and zoom in on this and take a look at what that details did. So let's turn that off and then back on again. You can see it's subtle. I see the detail mostly here underneath the stairs and along this banister. That's where it's having the most effect. I might pull those medium details up a tiny bit more. I want to bring out all of these grungy details, but I don't want to make it look gritty. I don't want to start adding so much detail that it starts to look like noise and creating artifacts. I think that's a really good balance right there. Again, we can turn it off and back on again. And then to really take in what we've changed in this image, let's take a look at our before and our after. It's just brought out so many of those wonderful, wonderful details. Now, I am looking at this window and it does feel a little bit bright to me. Because that's in our brightest highlights, if we go up to our light tool, we can always, let me zoom out to see this properly. We can pull back on those highlights a little bit, and that's just going to tone down the brightness in that area. And I think that's pretty close to perfect. Let's take a look at our overall before and after. Let me know in the comments and in the chat what you think of this image. I would love to hear your feedback. And let me know if you've ever gone out to take Urbex pictures, if you've done any urban exploration and gone into any abandoned places and gotten some awesome shots. I would love to hear from you. This is one of my favorite genres of photography. It's so much fun. I'm a bit chicken to go into places that are fenced off, but when I have the option to go into an old palace like this and take pictures, I just, it was a blast. So from there, I'm going to go ahead and click apply. That's going to take me round trip back to Lightroom, and then I'm done. So I hope this was useful for you. Whether or not you're using Lightroom as your home base, all of these steps, all of the tools that I use in Luminar AI are still going to apply if you're not using Adobe products, and that's totally cool. All right, thank you, Pat. I'm glad you liked it. So here was our final image here in Lightroom from Luminar AI. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and call it a day. I hope you guys enjoyed the episode. I hope you got something out of it and learned what Urbex means if you didn't already know. That's urban exploration. So with that, I'll wish you guys a wonderful day. I'm actually going to be out for the rest of the week, and Vanelli will be taking over for me on Thursday and Friday. So I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your week. I will see you next Tuesday. Bye, everyone.